All right, here we are, Friday, Mr. Ben. Excited to have another conversation with you about some of what we're learning in Radar. Some great learnings this week. I'm actually pretty pumped about some of the activities we've been working on. Thought we'd share this with the group as we go headfirst into this AI world of automation. And for those that haven't been tracking, we launched Radar this past couple weeks, and we've been iterating on it as a experiment to bring AI into workflows and what that actually means for the customer's experience. Maybe what say you over there, Ben? What are you feeling about how we've progressed so far?
Yeah, we're going to go through our content here. We actually added a feedback mechanism that allows us to track and give feedback on each little piece on an article so that we can increase the quality bar. We have, we're just going to look over the content itself to see how it's performing. It is AI generated content, and that actually allows us to.
Boo! Boo! Not that bad. I think the reality is here. Look, from a learning perspective, what we're trying to figure out is look, this isn't going away. We're going to be automating a lot of these pieces as we move forward, and we want to dive in for people trying to do this and help them see what's possible. The tools are going to keep getting better. So the idea here is that we can learn together and figure out what's working. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how we're breaking down content. We're using slightly different models for each piece of it. So we've got summaries, headlines, images, body. We also have stylistic treatments of tone and voice that are affecting these areas. And those are also model dependent. And then ultimately people are coming to this to read, right? They want news and we want to give them news. We also want to highlight contributing articles and things that people can follow up on and start to go directly to a source so that people can read from the authors. The point is, how do we humanize this process in a way that creates value for people reading and want to learn news? And again, this is product and design news, so somewhat niche and focused on one particular area. So that's the objective. So I think we could just dive right in and start figuring out what's interesting here. Yeah, so if we look specifically at the homepage, we've got a feed. We've got this feed. We've modified it a few times just to start figuring out what is interesting to read or what could be put on the page. Um, what we're doing here is we have these headlines now and summaries that then get put into the overall article, and the overall article is a brief. So we call it a brief. It's basically summarizing a series of resources and then putting headline summaries of these sections here with links directly to the source material so people can read the full articles. So in this article, we've got an image asset that is pulling in the topic summary before it goes into the headline, or are we doing the headline first and then the topic summary to generate this image? It,
Yeah, we
is
actually
it
do. We do the topic first, and we actually leverage the article content itself. So we'll put them together, and then there's a second phase here that generates the scenario, and then we have the other actual image model. It'll get that scenario will actually get injected into the full image prompt, which then produces
right?
this.
And so in this content, we're using, I believe, ChatGPT for the image generation, correct?
Yes. Yep, we're
Yeah.
using a GPT model, one of their
Okay.
image models specifically.
And we just had more success with that, I think, or ChatGPT seems to be better with the images, but we haven't experimented with the other models as much. But um, yeah, so that was our first area, and we kind of stylistically have made a choice that we can talk about style later. So then we get this headline that's coming from the topic itself, um, and it's being generated by one of the models and the summary at the same time, or the summary and the headline are two separate generations.
So yeah, it's actually interesting. We have a couple of different phases. So we actually produce the headline in the very, very beginning, and then we actually go through and we do a second revision of the headline using Opus 4.8, and that actually comes with the article content itself. So they're actually combined and jumbled up together. And then the summary gets generated using one of GPT's models to summarize everything that's going on within the article. So
So at this stage, we have these section blocks which are opening up a subtopic within the larger topic that highlights the news, and this points directly to the article that is being referenced here. So in the body, we're using, what model are we using for this?
so for everything in the body, it's all Opus 4.8.
Okay. And then as we go down here, we've got a few other sections here that we've taken the summary and then we've highlighted what we call the deep cut, which is what is this in relation to a product or a designer's uh, leadership? Like, how should they be thinking about this? And then we've put in 3 questions for your team just to get people thinking about what does this mean for the practical application of their work and how could they apply it? So we've got numerous layers here. On the other side of this content, we do tag this content, and these tags have been predefined. How are we doing that?
So that's actually through a GPT model on the initial. I actually think it gets applied in the beginning stages when we're initially pulling in the links and grouping them together. So
Yeah,
we have the resources there on that sidebar, and based on the resources that's actually where the tagging and categorizing actually comes into play, which is interesting. Which might mean that there's potentially an opportunity for us to make the tags or categories more specific towards the article itself instead of the resources. So
right,
yeah.
right. Very cool. So there's a number of pieces that go into this. I think the interesting part here is that we've got it functioning, we've got all the parts that are working, and now we're in this tweak mode of aligning it towards how this reads smoother and what we could be doing differently to make it more useful to users. So if we pull back the curtain a bit, we can start to look at maybe some of the stylistic components. So like in our headline, I don't think we have this right. So I think the important thing here is that it's not to our standards or where we want it quite yet, but functionally it's doing a lot and um, it's put us in a place where we can be more nuanced with how we're trying to do this. I think the tendency is to try and do more up front and then it gets mushy. And I think we've tried to keep it as simple as possible and then start to figure out what matters in this exploration. Because you could continue to layer this in a way that just puts you in these recursive loops that don't actually solve any particular problem. Yeah, let's jump over to your screen and break down more of what you are doing on the stylistic components of these pieces.
Yeah, so for the prompt that actually provides a lot of the voice and the stylistic parts of the content generation, um, we actually have a specific one for our news articles, which is what we were just looking at. It was a news brief. And so we can already see here in the beginning, we like to frame right now our prompt writer, or at least the agent that's producing the content, as Ray. It gives it a little bit of a character. And then we actually go through and you can start to see how we're curating the voice and the tone of the article content itself. And so you can see a specific section that details who are you writing for. And we wanted to be specific about this is being tailored for design and product leaders. And one of the first rules here we actually get this is for a busy design or product leader, could be a design manager, product lead, founder, etc. And it gives a little bit of context of who they are. And this actually provides, I think, a good level of context here to make the content tailored towards that sort of idea.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where you made the suggestion, hey, let's just put the prompt in the tooling so that we can modify the prompt as we go along. So I thought that was nice and makes it easier for us to iterate on as we go through this. The next part you have is the headline and the summary. And are those also pulling from this, or are they separate prompts?
Yeah, so the title, the headline, actually gets generated from this prompt. So we keep it together so that it maintains some of the context throughout the piece and so that we're not spinning up multiple Opus 4 4.8 calls, which are pretty expensive, right? These are about like just for the Opus parts themselves, they run average about 10 cents. The image generation, of course, is the more expensive part. We also produce a meta description, we produce the article content body, so pretty much everything in there. And then we'll actually highlight like what's been specifically dropped based on a list of like rules that say to take it out. So we have this in terms of our summary prompt. We have it here in our feed summary. We're currently leveraging, and you can see in this page, we have OpenAI and GPT-4o. I don't know why I said and, but specifically just GPT-4o is being leveraged here for the feed summaries. And so it's much more simplistic since we're producing only a small amount of content. I tend to like to make the prompt smaller for them. I'd be open to see how other people might do this. Maybe it does need a giant prompt. I don't know, Brian. What?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where, yeah, as we go into the second or the third area we're going to talk about, which is quality and evaluation, it's interesting to see how much you can get done with how little and without losing sort of the objective of what you're trying to do with the content. And I think this is the game that's played in this world where you don't want to have to babysit it all the time trying to figure out how to generate words that make sense to us. Again, if this is creative writing and it's reading that I want to immerse myself in, which is fantasy oriented, that's going to be completely different. But we're trying to provide news context and quick reads for people. The goal is to be fairly straightforward with the copy to make it easy to consume. All right. And then um, so we've talked about, if we go back, we've got and then we've got image generation, which we're utilizing our own styles in there to create what we would say the Twilight Zone-ish e slash abstracted images to have fun with it. And maybe it's a little over the top, but I'm mesmerized sometimes by the images. And it's fun. There's thematic components where shadows merge into things that become a reality. Yeah, no, it's a fun piece of this. And I think the neat part about this is that we're utilizing the tool to create another tool that allows us to fix or adjust these as we go along. Yeah. All right. Let's switch over. I kind of want to get into this. We just started this new phase where we're rolling out evaluation tools and quality and trying to figure out what is the best way to keep informing quality. When you think about AI generated thing, there's going to be pushback and making it readable and making it feel like something I'd want to spend time with. And so honestly, this is hard. This is not an easy thing to do. And what we have done is put together somewhat of a new system to be able to evaluate content in the system. Maybe I can showcase what we're doing on the site. What we have now is you can see we've just implemented this in the admin view, and we're considering whether or not this should be a function for people on the outside, even bots, right? Tell you the truth is, can bots give feedback on content that would be for other bots? Not sure, but we've got a thumbs up or thumbs down, and we've got this little widget that if you click thumbs up, this one I tend to like, but let's say it's an image that is let's say odd,
Too creepy?
creepy, but I'm entertained. All right, so now we have feedback that's given into the system, and I can do this for all sections now. So our hunch here is that if we can provide ways of surfacing feedback on these, that we can start to figure out what is working and what isn't working within this AI generated content. And right now, it's pretty rudimentary and it allows you binary responses. We made the choice of binary at this stage to keep it simple, with the idea that we don't fully know how we're going to process that feedback, but the idea being that if we can capture it now, we can start to modify even how we capture the feedback. So, Ben, what's happening here on the back end as we're working on collecting this information?
In the back end, we got basically just a simple capturing mechanism that allows us to see what article it's attributed to, the feedback specifically, what section, who made the feedback. So you can see here in this admin page that we have going on, and actually, I wonder if we refresh the page, we can see, look at that, we got Brian's hero image feedback here from just 1 minute ago. It's an image that's slightly odd, creepy, but I'm entertained. And we can see how it's attributed to the article. We also have the thumbs up or thumbs down. And so I think the thoughts here on this is that we can actually start to, and this goes back to our some of our loop conversations about how we're cyclically learning over time and creating even automations that start to do this, is that we can actually go through, take that prompt that we currently have generating the article content image, and we can actually leverage that so that we can have our own agent work on the prompt to help curate the prompt itself. And so I think that gets actually pretty interesting. There's of course a few other opportunities to not necessarily use as the only thing, but there's potentially like fine tuning. We have supervised learnings that we can attribute to a model, or as I mentioned before, is simply going through and updating the prompts and having the agent do some of that work to just make it better.
Yeah, yeah. And it's in a creative way where you're trying to force decision and adding judgment to something um, that maybe in a creative way you might spend hours in front of Figma or some output. There's this part where it's touch and go with these tools, but then you start to look and start figuring out, okay, um, we're not directly influencing every part of it. We're cultivating sort of a system that helps produce results that, in some ways, start happening organically. So you're shaping the results. And so these loops that we talked about in previous discussions are ways that the creative can be modified. And our hunch here is that the stylistic treatments could also be modified over time as we get these inputs. Uh, I think we're still trying to figure out what that looks like, but there's a hunch here that we can influence the models by doing this.
Yep.
Yeah. Funny things like in my, and I don't know if it's just like daily moods. It seems to me like the models have their own moods. So I've noticed some that the women in the imagery have bobs. And I'm not sure like why bobs are like bob haircuts, right? Is why do they keep going back to bobs? And if it's
Is that a Twilight thing?
maybe I don't know, but I think it's kind of because I'm like, why the bob? The other thing that I tend to find is that there's a lot of looking through windows, right? Looking through other realities. And so the window is a metaphor for either your internal struggle or this other reality outside of your current one. But what I found is interesting is that it's trying to do that and the phone. So phones sometimes screen space also gets used as alternate realities and literal interpretation of what's happening, and this is that sort of Twilight thing. The other thing I find is with image generation, it tends to find common patterns are always there's always like a plant in our world, which I think is pretty funny because sometimes there's like an odd plant that's just placed somewhere. this one this image is just this one cracks me up.
Are they watching the TV or are they watching this monster
This is
manufactured?
the fun thing, and it's another TV, but the monster or the shadow is watching the Leave It to Beaver house. So I just think this one's pretty fun. But another pattern I see here in some of our energy is that there's a dripping clock. The clock drips time. Time is a dripping.
So
The monitors.
is the feedback a thumbs down? And is it, hey, we've used this dripping clock too many times, or is it a good?
I like this visual. The dripping clock may be too much on the images, but it creates a mood for sure.
Now
Yeah.
that's some crazy
Yeah.
stuff.
It, yeah, I think there's a couple other ones stylistically. Yeah, see the Bob again, very interesting.
Yeah, very
Another
unique.
Bob, you know what I'm saying? The other one is the coffee mug. There's always sometimes a coffee mug that's randomly sitting on the table, and then sometimes it gets creepy when it puts 5 or 6 coffee mugs on the table, and you're like, this one has 2 coffee mugs. It's like bizarro world, right? And I also like it when sometimes the is on the house. It's a full screen. Uh, right? And there's always like a little Easter egg in here, like the compass, right? And it'll relate back to the article in some meaningful way. But I think there's some fun to be had here with the images. Quite frankly, I don't take it too seriously, and it's somewhat enjoyable to look at them. So we'll keep tweaking it. But I think for people trying to do this, I think if we were to circle back around and are trying to jump into this AI general world, there's a few areas we've looked at and we have started to focus in on trying to refine. The first is just how you break the content down and how to use the models for specific pieces as these models get more expensive, or how can you utilize them in different ways to be able to accomplish the objective of the page. I think the second part is stylistically breaking down styles as they relate to different parts of the site and compartmentalizing them, or maybe trying to create continuity that becomes more difficult from color sets and palettes. I think there's a challenge there that we've leaned into. Hopefully, you get some ideas there. And then this next piece, I think, is the quality evaluation part where you're tweaking the loops and you're trying to figure out the model that works the best for what you're trying to create as an output. And I think maybe the idea here is that you're never going to be able to just work with one single model. You're going to use different models for different pieces of what you're working on. And so informing that based on feedback seems to be where this is headed. And so the tooling and the way to support that is an interesting part of the admin side. I think overall, I think there's some more pieces we're going to keep working on and bringing to the table. But those are 3 lesson areas that I think if you're going to start jumping into, those are key areas to get right and experiment with.
Fully agreed. Yeah.
All right, there it is, Friday. Excited about what we got going on this next week. But for all those following along, we are posting more of this on our YouTube videos and also publishing on our blog. So if you want to go to their blog, we have articles that we're posting around some of these topics. Till then, excited to keep sharing what we're learning. So thanks, gang.
Yep. Super excited. Bye, guys.
All right.